Toronto homes for 300,000. The federal government looking to fine municipalities for not building enough homes. All this and more with a good friend and mortgage broker, Dion Begg, right after this. Yes, my friends, we are back with Kanga Mortgage, Mr. Man, Dion Begg. How are you?
Hey, Gary, I'm great, man. Been enjoying the Canadian summer, getting out there with the kids.
I love it. I love it. And if you haven't been following along, at least with last week's video, I highly recommend you go watch that. And that's where Dion unveiled the new mortgage brand, and servicing his clients hasn't changed but gotten better, right?
You bet.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, as always, there's lots going on in our mortgage world, but Dion and I we don't always have to talk about Canadian mortgages and financing and lending, although obviously that's his expertise and that's why we're here. But in reality, there's so much going on that is that ripple effect, right? And I know you took your kids downtown and enjoyed the downtown core and got over to Center Island and that, just like everyone else, whenever Dion or I travel, we always got to pull up I wonder what it's like to live here. I wonder what it costs to live here.
Yes.
Talk to us about Center Island.
Yeah, so so the Toronto Islands and Center Island is the one where all the kids go for the amusement park. But there are a couple of islands down there, but two of them in particular, which is Ward Island and Algonquin Island, you can actually live on. So there are 262 houses on those two islands. And if you really want, you can put your name on a waiting list, and you might be lucky enough to be called up. But I'll tell you what I found when I was walking around there looking at these properties. So there's a wait list of with 500 names on that wait list. And every year, on average, it looks like somewhere between 2 and 3 of these properties on the island come up and become available. Now, these islands are on leased land, and they are therefore owned by the government. But also, their prices are capped, meaning that it's all agreed to and regulated. So if it's up for sale for $300,000, it cannot sell for more than $300,000. And I'm using that number, Gary, because the average price down there is somewhere between 150 and 400,000 for a house in effectively downtown Toronto, but just on the other side of the little bit of gap of water there. But the thing is, the likelihood of you actually getting it, unfortunately, is very, very slim. Would you like to live on that island?
I think I would like to experience it. I don't know about long-term living. That might be a different thing. But if I can get into some place for 300,000 downtown, I got to be all ears, right?
It sounds kind of crazy. Yeah. I mean, 300 grand for a downtown house. People jump up and down at that headline for sure. But once they find out that it's leased land, financing will be hard, and you got to go to work on a barge or during the middle of minus 30, that might be a bit of a challenge for some people.
Yeah, for sure. But hey, let's call it like it is. I know $300,000 is a lot of money, but we also live in a day and age where people have $300,000, right? That can happen, my friends.
A lot of people might say, well, at least I don't have to drive 3 hours to Muskoka to get to my cottage, maybe. Just jump in the ferry.
Exactly. Yeah. Good stuff. Now, I always find that intriguing, and I know every time I travel, right, I always look to see what the local prices are or stuff like that, and just kind of get a gauge. I remember once, if you're ever thinking about buying a vacation property, and now we're starting to see vacation properties come up for sale because typically that's a second residence and sometimes third, who knows? I remember a long time ago, I had a mentor saying, don't buy it because you just vacation there. Go there in the off season and figure if that's a place, he was actually in referencing, this is maybe a place I want to spend 6 months a year, or retire there. Go there in the off season to see if you still like that destination in the off season or the down season, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be there in that downtime, some of these places are ghost towns, right?
Yeah.
In those off peak seasons. But I'll tell you, when I traveled to Europe a couple of years ago, and I remember being in a Italian town called Pienza. Beautiful landscape. Tuscany was the region. And I remember looking at a local apartment, maybe 20 kilometers outside of the city. and it was something like 90,000 euros. And I did the math, and I'm like, wow, that's cheap. But again, same story. Would I actually want to live there or vacation there? Probably not.
Yeah.
It's a nice idea, but for practical reasons, probably not worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
follow now all these memories are coming up. I wish I could remember the name of the Instagram feed. Cheap vacation properties, something along those lines. I'm
Okay.
butchering it, but it's an Instagram channel or account, and they post, just places like that worldwide. You can go buy a nice farm house in the middle of, Italy for,
Yeah.
50,000 euros. You're like,
Yeah.
that sounds doable, but it's like usually in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
And then you're there, and then you may not may not want to be there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, my man. We were having a conversation offline about best and highest use of properties,
Yeah.
and sometimes we automatically think about best and highest use. What's the best return? What's the most money I can get out of this property if I change it or if I add value to it? Yet in your case, sometimes that's not always the goal or the conversation of where it lies. Right? Talk to us and share with us what you're
Yeah.
doing right now.
Yeah, so basically, the short story is one of my properties is becoming vacant. And looking at what's going on in my life and the life of my family and my in laws, it actually makes sense for them to go and at least temporarily live in that property. And so it's nice. And we've talked about this before. We like to look at the pieces we have on the chessboard, and each of us have different pieces. And depending on what you need, be it economically or for lifestyle reasons, you might be able to play these pieces to serve you. So, let me start with the history of this property. So, this is a property in Pickering, South Pickering, where which was effectively my first family home. Uh, when we left the property about 7 years ago, we converted it to a legal duplex. So
Mm.
let me first start with that. So when you apply for conversion, you have to submit plans to the city. And as I was looking through the file, and I still have paper files, some of them are paper. Everything now is electronic, but I still have some paper files. And we came across the floor plans. I'll just hold them up there, hand drawn floor plans on grade 6 grid paper that we actually submitted to Pickering City, showing the upstairs, downstairs dimensions and all of that.
Yeah.
But it was good enough. It was good enough. You know what? It probably is still good enough if you do it right. But I don't think many people would now with the technology available to be able to draw that online. But we converted it to a duplex years ago. And now the property is becoming vacant. I'm looking at the rental landscape at the moment. My in-laws need a place to stay. So here's the first thing: I got to furnish the place. So when you ask me, how was my weekend? In fact, a lot of my weekend was online, on Amazon, on Wayfair,
Yeah.
trying to find all the stuff you will need to furnish the place, right? And now I've said to myself, well, if I'm going to this effort to furnish this property for my in-laws, it presents a really interesting opportunity for me to experiment with mid-term and or short-term rental on the property. So I've reached out to some professionals in that world who've started to give me some advice. And if it all works out, yeah, I mean, the rental return on that may in fact be somewhere in the range of 30% per year higher than it would be if it was just a regular long-term rental. So,
Interesting.
we're going to put that out there. Again, it's kind of like all these things sort of came together, and I said, look, it's a great opportunity. Let's take advantage of this opportunity. When my in-laws move out in about 6 months from now, we'll put it out there and see what kind of interest we have on it. And it might be a new chapter for me in my investing career, because I've been a guest at many midterm and short-term rentals, but I've never been a landlord in that realm. So this will be a fun new adventure for me in real estate.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we always say real estate investing should be boring, meaning you're doing the same thing over and over again. However, there is that moment where you do have to perhaps try something a little bit different or something a little bit new and into your portfolio. You don't want all your eggs in the same basket, in a sense, right? That's how I'd look at that, right?
Yeah, it is. So, people talk about diversity in
Yeah,
investing.
yeah,
So even in the subset of real estate, there's even a subcategory of, midterm, short term, or long term. And again, like as you know, as an investor, Gary, when a property becomes vacant, you go through some emotions, and one of them is, oh gosh, I got to go, engage the property manager, and we got to go find a tenant. But the other way to look at it is, hey, this is an opportunity, right? To
Yeah.
say, okay, well, let's maybe mix things up and experiment. And if everything fails, guess what? You just go back to long-term rental. But something tells me that this will work out.
Yeah, yeah. And even from that long-term perspective, there are still a lot of people that look for that furnished unit, right?
Yes.
A lot of people look for that furnished unit, and long-term to them might be 1 or 2 year. They might want to sign a 2 year lease, knowing just based on their life journey and where they're at, right? So I think you got, and that's the great thing. We always teach, and we don't necessarily teach. We always share the fact that, hey, when you look at a property, you've got to have multiple exits or multiple strategies when you're looking at it. Otherwise, you get pigeonholed, and that hole could get very, very frustrating for you if you don't have any other alternatives to it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so course, we post our videos on YouTube and for the world to see, and we do our little shorts, and people have their thoughts and their opinions, and that's one of the reasons why we do this, because we want to engage with our, not only with our audience, but with individuals, and you. We want to engage with you. And one of our followers had a comment the other day, and we've both Deanna and I found it somewhat intriguing, because we always appreciate comments. We always appreciate when people take the time to post their comments and their thoughts, whether they are in line with ours or not. It doesn't matter. It's a great opportunity, a great platform for both Dean and I to expand our thought process and our horizon as well. So this is a post that was on one of. I'm going to put this one up first. Let me remove that blue one there. From Kevin in one of our videos here, and you can read it on screen. I'm going to start at that second paragraph and think about who's tied to the lifeline of the sector. Of course, the government, land transfer tax. He's talking about land transfer tax as being a big part of the problem. 5% added to every purchase in Toronto, so we have the double land transfer tax in Toronto, and the realtor fees and so forth, and we have an out-of-control market. Wages were left in the dust a long time ago. Development fees are through the roof. Yes. And all of this gets passed on to the end users. End users either being the home seller or the renter, right? And this last one, we'll spend some time on. The land transfer taxes need to be ditched and replaced with a commercial tax on rental properties. They are running a business and should be taxed as such. And obviously we have some. Let's just kind of highlight that last bit there. And obviously, we've got some thoughts on first thoughts when you read a comment like that, Dion. And I know there's multiple points that Kevin made, but
so first thing is 100% empathy, meaning I can understand the frustration, right? Prices are where they are. You and I have spoken about the affordability crisis, the fact that it's very hard for people to get their foot on the ladder. And yes, land transfer tax does contribute to the increase in prices or the transactional cost of purchasing. So that's the first thing I'll say. But again, to the writer's point there, the land transfer tax gets passed on to the end user, and I can understand the proposal here for land transfer tax needs to be ditched, he says, and replaced with a commercial tax on rental properties, because the landlords are running a business and should be taxed. And the funny thing there is that the end user of that building or that property is going to be the tenant. And so what will almost always happen in a scenario like this is Kevin is correct. The end user is going to be the one who ultimately suffers here, meaning that rents likely will have to increase if rental properties are taxed at a higher number.
Yeah. Well, and we are property owners. You and I are both taxed as running a business. The rental rates that we bring in, that's not capital gains tax. That's active income tax, right? So we are already taxed on the income that we bring in. And of course, what's left over is essentially what we're taxed on, obviously. And then we're taxed again at the sale of the property with capital gains. So we're taxed multiple ways on all of our investment properties. I get it. From one hand, you might almost take the stance that if it's going to be an investment property, I don't know how what the legal ramifications of this But my initial thought is, I wonder if there's a tax break for rental properties because we need more of them. You can almost look at it the opposite way, right?
Well, there is in a way already, Gary, and that is that, and many people don't know this, that the interest on your mortgage or the money that you borrow in order to buy that property is in fact 100% tax deductible. So
Hmm.
and that is one taxation benefit. The interesting thing, and you know this, but your listeners may not. In the United States, mortgage interest on your principal residence is 100% tax deductible, and therefore, if I was an American, I would never be a renter. I would just own my house because if I can write off that interest as a tax deduction, then that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, back to the tax in Canada. I do believe that we all need to pay our fair share for the roads, the infrastructure, the healthcare, the education system that we have. But yes, I think Kevin's comment here effectively just defers the problem down to the tenant. And again, if we go back to the initial problem, which is how are these people ever going to become homeowners? Well, by those tenants paying higher rent, how will they ever save enough money for the down payment to enter the real estate market? So it's a challenge, and this is the big challenge that our politicians have because they can't just deal with one problem.
Yeah.
That one problem has a knock-on effect, which then impacts a different segment of society. And yeah, it's I wouldn't want to be a politician in today's world trying to solve this problem. It's nice to kind of you and me throw out these solutions, but we know that that one solution has 10 knock-on effects, right?
Yeah. And I wonder if we would see more investor property owned turnover or enhancement. I'm thinking out loud at this moment. In the
Hmm.
States, you and I are maybe somewhat familiar with, and our listeners, there's a 1031 exchange in the States, which means I, as an investor owner in any state, can sell that property. And let's say I had equity or I have capital gains and I've increased and I've made $200,000 on that property. Well, in Canada, you would be taxed at capital gains on that. In the States, you can use a 1031 exchange so long as you're putting that money into another investment vehicle. I wonder if that would, I wonder what that ripple effect is in Canada if we were able to introduce something like that. I have no idea if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but from an investor standpoint, I think it's a good thing.
From an investor standpoint, a great thing. From, I guess, a class division standpoint, it would, I think, exacerbate the problem.
Interesting.
Meaning,
Yeah.
meaning that those who have equity and wealth would ultimately get wealthier, and
Mm,
those that do not are going to find it again much harder too. And as wonderful as our southern neighbor is, one of the biggest challenges that you will see in parts of America is the disparity of wealth, right? And while we do complain about it here to some extent, and rightfully so, the degree that that happens in the United States is much higher. And in fact, I have a friend of mine who moved to the States, another mortgage broker friend of mine, and he said to me, Dion, I love where I live, but I wouldn't want to be poor in America because
interesting.
they just don't have the same social network or safety net that we have up here.
Wow, that's a good point. Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
So, as you can all imagine, there's a ton of ideas, and I think it's important that people like you and I and you, our listener, keep throwing out ideas, and we just keep cycling them through in a sense because at some point we're gonna have to make some changes, and who knows who has that next bright idea? Like keep throwing them out there in the comments, and you might think to yourself, well, how are we ever going to change the Ontario government or BC government or Canadian government? I went, and it starts locally, right? It starts locally in your local municipalities. That's where you can see the most change. So if you have influence or friends on your local government, talk to them, right? I know I'm friends with our local mayor, and we often have nice conversations back and forth, and always constructive, and it's really good actually.
So, Gary, if that's the case, I would love sometime in the next little while for you to talk to your mayor about some of the comments of the conservative leader at the moment, Pierre Poilievre.
Mm,
Uh, basically, he's proposing that if he comes into power, that if local municipal governments don't increase their rate of building permit approval by 15%, that he's proposing that the federal government withhold funding at the provincial level. So basically, he's saying we have a problem. We need the process to be faster and smoother, which I think everybody would agree to. But what he's saying is to all these local mayors, what you need to do is you need to make it easier and faster for people to build. On the face of it, it sounds like a really interesting plan. But if you can talk with your mayor about that idea and find out his take on it, I'd love to hear what he says, because I'm sure there are other issues around that, maybe regarding safety, not wanting to rush things through processing. But I'd love his feedback on that.
Well, I don't know about other. I know. Let me backtrack a little bit. There's many people that will put their hand up and say, "No way, not in my backyard." We all know the NIMBY movement, right? So there's that to manage and walk through as well. It's interesting. It's definitely an interesting conversation for sure, and one that we should pull the lid off and let all the worms out, because it's a conversation that has to happen. Not
You know
not
what? I'll just mention one more thing that kind of fits into this, which is we were talking about Dr. Mike Moffat, who's a
Yeah.
economist, property economist, and one of his proposals, proposals, but one thing that he discussed this week was the idea that back after the war was finished, there was a massive push for housing in Canada, and the way that they were able to build, in particular, apartment buildings very quickly, was they had a pre-approved building plan, which once it had gone through permits, was a pre-approved, we'll call it a model, right? And if you wanted to build this model, you could go and build it without having to go through all the same bureaucracy because it was pre-approved,
I like it.
right?
Interesting.
And so what he's suggesting is that maybe we need to start applying that again, going forward, which would maybe expedite things. And yeah, the first thing I thought of was like, oh my God, all the houses are going to look the same. But then when you drive past a Matamé or a Tribute development, they're all the same anyway. So it may not necessarily be a bad thing. And it's a interesting solution to a real problem, and one which, as I thought about it longer and deeper, I said, you know what, this actually makes a lot of sense.
It does. And you think about all the properties that I know I've owned, and I know you've had them in the past too. The 1950s bungalow, semi bungalow with the side entrance
Yep.
that leads itself to a basement
That's,
apartment,
that's this one. This
right?
one here. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. How do we bring that back, or how do we bring back or introduce developments that encourage secondary suites? Doesn't matter where they are in the house, but secondary suites, right?
You
I
know,
think.
Gary, that's a great idea. And for many, many years since I came to Canada, it's always been a head scratcher for me, meaning
Yeah.
every house can be built into a duplex, but no developer builds them into that duplex standard. There were two issues with that. One was government zoning, which only allowed for single family, which in the city of Toronto has changed and is rolling out across the province, from what I understand, very soon. So that won't be a problem. But the second thing, and this is where I am not a builder, and maybe if we've got some builders listening to us, the second thing is this old idea that, if you're building a basement, that it takes several months for that basement foundation to settle before you can finish it. Now, you work in real estate more deeply than I do on the property side of things, Gary. Have you come across builders who are building these purpose-built, day one, ready to be occupied basement apartments?
Uh, Far and few between, but I do know when you go to a builder and buy a new house, you can have the builder finish the basement for you. So
Right.
I don't know. I know that argument's out there, but if that's the case, then why can we also have the basement finished by the builder
Yeah.
under the same permit?
Especially if the zoning now allows for it,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
Especially if the zoning now allows for it. So,
Yeah.
if I was a builder, I would be looking at that as an opportunity, whereby it's like we've got the rent, the mortgage helper in the basement, right?
Yeah.
And we can sell our product with you. You live upstairs with your family in your 3 or 4 bedroom property, and you rent out the basement, and that basement rent helps you own this property. It makes a lot of sense economically, I think.
Yeah, it does. And I know there's different things. Like my point or my thought was, today's building code and building standards are far superior than where they were even 20 years ago, with the water membrane and the water penetration that they have to alleviate. It's so much better today than it was even 20 years ago. So very few brand new basements leak. And then the parking aspect of it, we got to figure out a way around that and allow, parking to be within garages when we go to that. Because when you go, and you and I have both been there, when we go and apply for that secondary suite, and you have to have a minimum of 3 or 4 outdoor parking
Yes.
locations, and they will not accept a garage as one.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to alleviate that moving forward, and we're going to have to be able to utilize that garage as a full parking spot. Otherwise,
Agreed. Agreed.
we'll keep circling back to the same issue.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay, so remind us of that Twitter feed again, because you just introduced it to me. I already followed it, and I'm gonna go read it this afternoon because it looks really good.
Yeah, yeah. So that's Dr. Mike Moffat, Moffat. And yeah, great insight. And really, in my opinion, very balanced view. I don't think there's any, well, from the way I read it, I don't believe this guy is of any political stripe. It's just here's a problem, and here's what seems to be fairly practical solutions for this problem. So definitely worth checking out.
Excellent, excellent. And how do people get a hold of you?
You can find me at where's this thing? Kanga
Hey,
Mortgage, kangamortgage.ca.
excellent, excellent. New brand, same service with a lot more. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Just go
Smart.
check it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Just go check it out. And of course, Dion has serviced a lot of my properties over the years and has always been incredibly helpful and insightful. Again, my friends, we love reading the comments. So if you have comments of what we talked about today, or even future ideas, or you want us to touch on specific things, let us know. Send us both a message or drop it into the comments here. We're happy to do so. For Dion Begg, I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next video. Bye for now.